Joe, I want to ask you about the misinformation bill. This is something we've all been campaigning on. The Prime Minister has now been forced to dump this controversial legislation. It didn't have support from anyone in the Senate. The Coalition was against it. The Greens were against it. The crossbench were against it. I mean, it was madness to think that for a year and a half, he pursued this. I mean, you've got to say it's his obsession with censorship.
Look, I don't actually think so. I think that the story is a bit more complex than that.
Because he was so angry about The Voice and what he thought was misinformation against it.
I think there was a big problem with elements on the left who were upset that the electorate didn't just do what it was told, and anyone who, they can't say that all the people who voted against the Voice were, working class immigrants, which they were, because that would make them sound classist and racist. And so they had to say, oh, they weren't educated enough. And so we have to educate them. We have to protect them from this misinformation. Similar stuff to COVID as well. So I think it came from an incredibly pretentious but well-intentioned place, but it very, very quickly became apparent that this thing was at Pandora's box. It needed to die and die quickly. I've never seen a policy pursued with less enthusiasm than this one. They made no attempt, basically, to get it through the Senate, no attempt to negotiate because they wanted it to die. They knew how harmless it was, how hopeless it was. I wrote in a column today that this bill died as friendless as an Ayatollah at a bar mitzvah, and that's exactly what it did. It had no friends on either side of politics, and I can absolutely assure you that this is something that for weeks now, if not longer, the government has just been sort of waiting to die and just get off the books, get off the decks. So this is not something that they're going to resurrect and not something they were desperate to do. They realised very quickly, I think, that this raised so many questions, created more problems than it solved, and it was just an island of Dr. Moreau monster.
Steve, I want to ask you about my opening comments as well about the cost of living and how dramatically our country is deteriorating under Anthony Albanese. Whether it's his misguided attempts to introduce misinformation laws because he didn't like the outcome of The Voice and he blamed misinformation, whether it's, most critically the cost of living crisis, but every single thing he's doing is turning voters off.
The story in The Australian on Saturday really shocked me. I mean, to read that our standard of living is now back where we were in the 1950s, that it's much worse than recessions that particularly Joe and I have lived through, and you have too, partly Shari, in the early 80s and the 90s. That is shocking to read. And Australians are really hurting. I mean, politicians in this country, and I've been thinking about this all day today, politicians of both sides in this country are starting to really annoy me because many of them, not all of them, but many of them are completely out of touch with what's happening in the real world. Now, people might say that I'm out of touch because, I'm reasonably well paid and, I'm at the end of my working life, but I'm not a politician who's trying to steer the country to a better place. And every other OECD country, and my great mate Ross Greenwood, I'm sure will tell you this later, every other OECD country is doing better than Australia. How can that possibly be with all the riches we've got, with everything we've got at our disposal, with all the advantages we have over the rest of the world? How can we be sitting here in 2024 going worse? We're a busted-ass country at the moment, and it's really, really hurting people, and it's really disturbing. I think the Labor Party are going to have to really rue the day, I think, that they put Anthony Albanese in charge. You made those comments at the start of your program. I agree entirely. The bloke who probably should still have been there is the bloke who gave his valedictory speech to Parliament last week in Bill Shorten. Because what Labor's done is they've installed a hard left Prime Minister. He's got a hard left Foreign Minister.
Exactly.
And the Australian public are going, we are no better off, and these people are to blame.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, Albanese pretended that he was going to lead from the centre. I mean, he gave that interview to you, Joe Hildebrand, in the election campaign where he said he wasn't going to go woke, indicating he was becoming a centrist. But ultimately, you can't abandon, and he has been a left faction warrior his entire political career.
Yeah, but I mean, he's been a fixer more than a factional fixer and a factional warlord.
Ideological.
More than an ideological.
No, I disagree.
To be honest, I don't think, if you know the sort of hardheads who knock around Sussex Street, they're not a particularly sort of ideological bunch.
He has been ideological. He was at the protest. I know
the footage of the protests, and back then he would have been expected to say certain things. Look, he certainly believes that he has moved to the centre. He is far more to the centre than he has ever been, and just light years
Doesn't
away
that
from
say a lot?
light years away from where he was. Well, look, I was a
Seriously,
stupid student socialist when I was
You're
younger,
the Prime Minister.
and now I've got half of Twitter
You're
calling
sounding
you a
like
fascist.
one now.
But I think what Albanese has learned is that every time he sort of dips his toe in the water of anything perceived as ideological or wokeness, it hurts very, very much, and you get burned and you get punished for it. And we saw that with The Voice. And again, he responded by dumping all that stuff like a hot potato, by talking about nothing but cost of
Then
living.
introducing misinformation laws, the ultimate
and letting those laws wither on the vine and die. I promise
he
you.
didn't let them. He fought for them for a year and a half.
No one is mourning that bill.
He introduced them in June
Party.
last year. He fought for them for a year.
And they've just been sitting in a back room, quietly asphyxiating ever since, and they're finally.
Oh, Joe, come on. I love you like a brother, Joe, but
God
seriously.
Maybe I'm the naive one.
Yes,
Seriously,
you are,
mate.
because
When's the cheerleading going to stop?
No, well, I'm just trying to provide some context for it. So again, I've been highly critical.
You're sticking up for your mate.
I've been incredibly critical of Labor, and basically for the last 3 years of Labor being in opposition, I was screaming from the rooftops. People like me and Joel Fitzgibbon, both public and private,
but that's a
saying we
problem.
have got to ditch all that woke crap. We've got to get the party back to the middle. I was wrapped when Donald Trump won the election, because it means the Democrats have to do the same and learn what happens when they start to go on ideological crusades